Indeed, Valen, and those two words go hand in hand. Don't you think? The freedom and the responsibility. Well, the recent shooting in Paris, France at the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo has spawned a debate, or sparked that debate, regarding the freedom of expression and the responsibility thereof, especially not to infringe on the human rights of others. Today, we have Professor Anton Harber. He's a professor of journalism and media studies at the University of the Witwatersrand, joining us to discuss this further. Very good morning to you, Prof. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you and good morning.
Firstly, let me get your response to this week's attacks.
Absolutely horrific. Absolutely horrific. There can be no justification. You know, cartooning can be provocative. It can be offensive. That's what satirists do. But you have many ways to react. You can ignore it. You can respond. You can criticize it. You can protest. You can take legal action. There is no justification for violence or threats of violence. So it's absolutely horrific, but I suppose the heartening part has been to see the people of France, the people of the world, the Muslim community, everyone stand up and say, this is not acceptable, and we need to defend and nurture and protect our cartoonists, our satirists, our journalists.
Just speaking about that, the hashtag I am Charlie, you know, those who are saying that all of us actually should stand up and fight against such outrage or outrageous behavior has been trending on social media platforms. This has been seen not as an attack on journalism per se, but an attack on freedom at large.
Yes, it's not just an attack on that's the way the world sees it. Not just an attack on a group of cartoonists in Paris, or even on journalists. It's an attack on the notion that we should be free in a democracy to take different views, to have different opinions, to be provocative, even to be offensive. You know, democracy is an attempt to give a government, a ruling party, a government legitimacy. And you can't have legitimacy without free speech, because legitimacy means that everyone's participated in the process of legitimizing that government, and you can't do that if you're restricted in your opinions, your views, and so on. So it's fundamental to our society, our notion of democracy, our notion of our dignity and our personhood, that we should be free to say what we want to say.
The media, journalism is often seen as a mirror to society in general. It's a bit of a litmus test to get a sense of what the people on the ground are feeling. Why is it then that you feel, or that we see an attack on those who are bringing the message? Literally, we're seeing the messenger being shot at. Why is that?
Well, I think one has to try and understand the motivation, the strategic motivation of those who undertake this action. I think it's to try and divide French society, to try and polarize society in order to help them recruit and mobilize in the Muslim community of Paris, which is not that religious a community and certainly not that radical a community. So that's the aim, and that's why in responding we have to say, don't respond to that in the way they want, by dividing French society, by evoking anti-Islamic talk and discussion. Respond by coming together, which is what I think the world is trying to do.
Indeed, and I think that is what has happened. Actually, it does not work in the favor of the extremists. But the next question is an age-old question about where freedom of expression ends and the freedom or rights of others, rights to association, your freedom of religion, freedom of your right to dignity, to uphold what is sacred to you. Where does that end, freedom of expression, and everybody else's rights begin?
My view is that we must maximize freedom of expression and only limit it when there's a threat of violence or physical harm or serious hurt, and a real and imminent threat of that, as our Constitution sets it out. I think our Constitution does it well. You know, a lot of what we do as journalists is provocative. Our job is to get people thinking and talking and engage with them, and you do that by often being provocative, and inevitably people can be offended. We all have views which we are sensitive about, which we feel strongly about, which it can offend us if people attack it. Sorry, I lost my line of
That's
discussion.
probably because I was trying to interject. In fact,
Yes.
at that moment, at that thought
Yes.
of yours, some may argue that Charlie Hebdo
Yes.
was actually being too provocative, that they were being irresponsible, and that bordered on threats of violence. Like you said, that freedom of expression should only be limited to when the expression borders on hate speech, etc. Some may argue, if I may play devil's advocate,
Yes.
that they just went too far. There were a number of attacks on them already, and that perhaps they should have scaled back. What do you think about that?
Well, we must be careful of, it can be the equivalent to saying a wife should keep her mouth shut for fear her husband will beat her. No, she must say what she needs to be saying, and do that in safety and without fear. Satirists are provocative. Comedians provoke. They must do that without fear. We must understand the enormous value they bring to our society in promoting debate and discussion and taking on the rich and powerful and discomforting those who are puffed up with their power and their wealth.
Let's generalize for a moment or two now. South Africans, are we accepting of satirists, of journalists who perhaps push the envelope?
I think we've had our debates and our discussions. I'm pleased to say when those discussions have got overheated and there's been threats of violence, those have been slapped down pretty quickly. But I think to have full debate and discussion and even protest and legal action around it, that's healthy, that's democracy. The more of that, the better. So in South Africa, I'm feeling that we're a young democracy, and sometimes we're a little too sensitive about these things. But I think we're developing ways and means in which to deal with it within our democracy.
Mentioning off air, we spoke about the number of journalists who had died on the line of duty in places such as Syria, Ukraine, Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan. So you and I also spoke about whether or not there was an increase in such a phenomenon or whether or not it's been covered widely enough. But my question is, where to now? What do we do as journalists? Are you finding that perhaps we're having to be more extreme because we have to compete with social media platforms, people becoming citizen journalists? What do we do now as a media fraternity?
Journalists are increasingly under risk, and the numbers are not necessarily the highest they've ever been, but there's more attention because of who and what and how it happens. But I think we have to say as a society that we recognize the fundamentally important role that journalists play. And as a society, nationally and internationally, we have to protect that role and protect those people. They've got to operate within a space without fear, a secure space, and the job of our states and our governments and our international organizations is to make that space safe.
Prof. Harber, it's always a pleasure chatting to you. I think more on a personal front for me as a journalist as well, but I'm sure you also derived plenty of value from that particular discussion. Professor Anton Harber, Professor of Journalism and Media Study at the University of the Witwatersrand.